right, everyone. Thank you for coming back. I believe we are all very hungry after Francis' wonderful and flavorful presentation. So tremendous appreciation for all of you stay here with us. We'll try to wrap it up as soon as possible to let everyone go. But before we end the section, we have this final conversation, roundtable discussion, and at the same time, there will be question and answer from the audiences. So please prepare your questions and please be generous to speakers on the stage to share your thoughts, comments, and reflections on the amazing presentations we listened today. Let me briefly summarize today's conversation and presentations. The means of curatorship and curation could be an analytical device that enable us to unpack the power of sovereignty, however, at the meantime, being instrumentalized by the power. To address this political interiority of curation, on one hand, we learn from the entanglement between the aesthetic, nationalistic, and the economic political dimension of curation in Davis' provocation about the curatorial state and authorship sovereignty in the geopolitical vicinity called Southeast Asia. He disenchant the author figure, a creator figure of curator, by indicate how the professionalization of curatorialship has fostered a new form of sovereignty in the post-colonial nation state in Southeast Asia. From Zoe's wonderful and personal account of curatorial attempt of interweaving the intimacy between trauma of history, we encounter various forms of structural violence as a result of this curatorial state, and the possibility of responding to such a regime of presentation from within, from curatorial, the role of curator, and the method of the method that the curator adopt to demonstrate through the exhibition making. The notion of geopolitics demonstrate very much through situating those modes of curation in above mentioned two presentations. On the other hand, we have Manray and Pei-Yi take us to reconsider the potentiality of South and the historical urgency to readdress this notion of South. Manray shared his cutting-edge approach in highlighting the contemporary issues of living through and uplifting through those artistic lens of Taiwanese indigenous artists about our shared contemporaneity in this present time in Taiwan. Pei-Yi's presentation touched upon this integration of South in both international and domestic / Taiwanese case studies. Tremendous genealogy you have presented here with us about this notion of South. Our journey ends here with Francis' full presentation on the politics of gastronomy in relation to the intensive genealogy of exhibition making projects on the global scale, which may or may not lead us to reconsider this illusion of representation that the curatorial or curatorialship has very much performed through the process of exhibition making. And I will turn the mic to Nabul to also provide his reflections on this particular roundtable discussion.
Yeah, thanks for your wonderful summary. And I will turn the language into Mandarin to make this discussion bilingual. OK， 所以我讲中文。那今天我觉得非常有趣的就是，其实刚才方池他有做蛮完整的这个 summary。那我觉得比较有趣的是说，我们今天讨论的很多东西其实都围绕在一个对于就是现实的一个不满之上哦。那这个所谓的现实不满，不只是对这个现实环境或是社会情境的一个不满，它还包括了就是说，在从事这个策展专业过程中所遭遇的，不论是论述上的一个不足哦，或是在进行这个所谓的local 就是地域的这个第一线的工作时候所遭遇到的一个困难。那这些困难其实它在各个不同的亚洲国家，或者是我们更广泛讲，在各个不同的南方国家，它其实 不太能够一概而论哦。譬如说，越南的问题，像今天Zoe他提到的是这个越南好的作品可能是遭遇到没有办法带回国展出的一个问题哦。那台湾的问题刚好相反，就是台湾好的作品好像一直很难带出去哦。那这其实都是因为双边所遭遇到的这个国际地缘政治，还有地区内部的这个政治系统的一个差异，那还包括文化系统的一个差异所造成的一个结果。那在处理这些所谓的困境或是不满的时候，其实就间接的发展出不同的一个方法。那有些方法可能会着重在这一个如何向南方学习，或是如何连接南方哦。那有些方法只是企图就是去进行更复杂的一个论述。那甚至包括今天 Francis 他也分享了这个非常有趣的以食物作为一种方法跟媒介哦。那这里面其实都各有各的这一个优点，但是像是佩仪他有提醒到，就是说在这些方法学之中呢，其实我们要小心它背后所潜藏的一些可能政治上面的一个意图或是陷阱。好，那我在想说，能够把今天的接下来的一个时间呢，一部分就是交给各位讲者来去做一个讨论，因为其实今天的5场演讲其实都环环相扣，那整个论坛的这个设计非常的有趣。其实看起来是朝向不同的一个题目，但是彼此之间都有所非常强烈的一个关系跟联系哦。那我想说能够询问就是现场的 speaker， 就是看你们能不能就是有一些问题能够针对另外一位这个 speaker 去做一个发问，那就是看说哪一位想要先这个。对，先率先这个先讲 ，Yeah, OK, David.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Pei-Yi and a quick question for Francis. Francis, you've obviously done a huge amount of research on this subject, and it was great to see such a summary of that. But I want to invite you to just go a little further and say what you think is specific to the curation of all this food contemporary art. I think after halfway through your survey of these projects, I really started to wonder, okay, so what is it that binds them? Is there a certain way that curators have approached this subject, and to what extent can we generalize? I just invite you to kind of speak to that. And in Pei-Yi's case, I wonder, and this is really just about my own ignorance in the kind of cultural politics of Taiwan. You, in the early part of your presentation, you present Taiwan as having a history as a kind of launch pad for a southward-facing colonialism, in fact. And I wonder whether there's any blowback against that, or whether there's any reluctance to repeat that. I'm conscious of the geopolitics of labour at this time, and labour migration, which put Taiwan, in fact, very much more in the same group as the Japan and the Korea in that respect. You know, that there's a need to open one's borders more liberally, and Southeast Asia has been the beneficiary, if you like, of those policy changes. So I just wonder if you could expand a little.
To come up with a generalized and generalizable statement or observation about the quite diverse range of exhibitions that I've presented in my slideshow. However, one of the key questions that kept coming to my mind as I was undertaking this research was the extent to which one can curate works of art by Asian artists who incorporate food as part of their installation or performance without, as Bell Hooks put it, eating the other, without exoticizing and presenting a very essentialized view of their identities and their works. And this is something that Rickwitt's performance installation runs the risk of doing. I kind of like suggested in my presentation that his food performances at times tend to come across as a kind of a readily digestible form of culinary cosmopolitanism. And so I think that's one of the curatorial stakes, or that's what is at stake in curating works like these. The other point I'd like to make is that in my own exhibition, which I co-curated with my colleague Marnie Badham, one of the things that was at the forefront of our minds was the question of hospitality and the relationship between guests and hosts as it's played out between the curators, me and Marnie, and the artists that we included in the show, as well as the hosting institution, RMIT University Gallery itself. And I think this relationship is a very fraught, at times parasitic one. And here I'm kind of like recall Michel Serres' account of the parasite and how the French word hôte, H-O-T-E, actually signifies both hosts and guests. And so there's a kind of like a mutual feeding off each other at work. And one of the things that we were also had to consider, and I didn't really had the time to go into this in my presentation, was how do you curate a show that explored questions of hospitality, of generosity, in the context of a post-colonial Australia, where the exhibition is sited on indigenous land that has never been ceded, and we did try to include a number of indigenous artists, but we had like a 3-month lead up to the exhibition, and so the exigencies of curatorial time meant that those artists couldn't be included. It was a question of logistics. But we were always conscious of the fact that we were curating on indigenous land and that we were guests and they were the hosts.
I will speak in Mandarin, so change another channel. 非常感谢 David 的这个提问。那我想说，台湾其实在面对南方这个议题的时候，其实就像我在报告里面提的，它在很多不同的时代都有不同的这个意涵。那在早期，其实我们跟日本的关系其实非常密切，所以像台湾当代艺术其实大量的是跟日本连结。那当代艺术在讨论东南亚的部分，大概就是这10年的事情，尤其是2013年有一个文化政策叫翡翠计划之后，才有更多的这个艺术家，或是我们才开始转移参考点。在2010年左右，我们的所有的那个观点还是完全是跟随着欧美中心的这个部分，所以台湾其实是我会觉得是就这近10年来才开始真正的看向南方，而这个看向南方是把自己置身在这一个区块里面，去连接东南亚，以及真正的去看南岛的这一块东西。当然，被压迫者当他转身的时候，常常会变成另外一个压迫者。所以台湾在这个南北的问题里面，一直都处于这个不均衡的这个状态。他一方面觉得自己是南方被压迫的，但常常在很多的状态里面又转身变成了北方。那像刚刚 David 有提到的是那个移民的问题，尤其是东南亚移民，其实到台湾已经有20年以上的历史了。他们已经有第2代的这个第2代基本上已经成人了。但是真的，台湾政府真的开始去重视这一块，也是要到2016年的这个新南向政策之后，才真正的去把各项各样的东西，把它真的在政策上面、在教育上面、在文化或是在这个艺术展览里面，可以把它建制出来。所以我想 可能以这个回答来回应 David 的这个部分。
Maybe I also respond to David's question a bit. Actually, just not long ago, I was talking to a friend, and then he said, "You know, Manray, I know why you curate a show called The South, the art of asking and listening." I said, "Why?" And then he said, "Oh, because some curators have done a show called Why Not Ask Again." I said, "Wow, that's good. Wow, that's really to the point." It's asking and listening, and why not ask again? Continue to ask. And then he said, "But do you know why there's like this new exhibition called the Hidden South? After you curate a show called the South." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the South, if you know there's one, you have to hide it. Especially you have to hide it away from the people of the North. The people of the North don't understand what you are talking about, especially if you want to show it, the show exhibit, the people of the North very often would misunderstand it or would not even see it, because it has to do with this North-South bipolar situation." And I said, "Wow, that makes sense. Yeah, that's why you need a hidden South. You need to hide it." Of course, now the curators of Hidden South would be objecting to what I'm saying now. The point is, actually both shows, and also along with two other shows in the east side of Taiwan last year, there is a Pacific Coast public art show, and there is a Senchuan Lihai. It's it's an indigenous show. Anyway, the point is that this group of curators actually they work in the field for a long time, and they are like deep into the whole the villages and the people who live there. Yeah, and then so the idea is actually not to just show it. It's actually to say, okay, use the situation of doing a project, and the money can be injected into the villages where actually there's no possibility to make any art or cultural practices. Yeah, in the sense of saying, okay, cultural practice should not be just related to living subsistence. It actually can be a part of the culture. Culture related to the time that is extra, that is extracted from like different time. Yeah, the time that you use to survive and to make an economic living. So all these projects have these a very common thread to it. And even, for example, the show that I curated in the Kaohsiung Museum, the South, the art of asking and listening, actually the 27 group of artists, more than half of them are actually activists. And a lot of documentary filmmakers or documentary photographers, they have to face the threat of like gangsters, the threat of company using police force to kick them away, and so on. So they are deeply, deeply engaged with the issue of the South. They are actors. They are doing things. They are doing things. So the problem of showing the South is that the people from the North always misunderstand, as if what you are seeing is just the result of work to show it to you. You are the judge. You are the judge. You to make your judgment. And then so in the back, the action, the life, the subsistence behind it is hidden from you. Yeah. So that's why I think it's a very good point to make, to say, okay, exhibition of the South itself is very difficult, because you exhibit to the people, the viewer of the North, the viewer of the art world, and then they don't understand, So I think that's also my response to this, response to this question. And of course, both or the 4 exhibitions about the south, the south and the east last 3 years actually are also into deconstruction of the government policy. The government has this policy of the big South, of southward bound and so on, and there's a long history that is true to it, but artists, curators, they are deconstructing it. So it's not like, okay, we're responding it and just say, hey, there's this money, we're using it, we're happy, and then that's it. So there is also the deconstruction side to it, and it is important, for the people of the North, the art people, to really understand the whole background story of it, and also why we need to bring the people of the North to the South to really understand what is happening in the field and what is happening on the ground. That's my response.
Okay, thanks, Manray's response. And we still have 18 minutes, and I think it's time we should provide the chance for our audience to provide some questions. 我们还有18分钟，所以想说，现场有没有 ？Okay.
I had one question for David. When you're making a presentation, initially the curatorial you pose through the cases, where the interview is the form, where there is a certain kind of case history, like almost a paramedic. The curatorial is the paramedic who produces the case history to make them legible, make the artist legible and come into practice. And it seems to be a model. And then by the end of it, you go to the curatorial almost like an engineering project, which is, engineering project is a bit different because in both sense they are very de-authored projects. And the classic thing about the engineering project, there's a beautiful book about the same landscape of Indonesia that you had the image of, the engineers of Happy Land, and which is this, it is engineer itself the subject. So I was just wondering whether curatorial as a word can encapsulate such diverse knowledge, practices, instrumentalities, mobilization of knowledge for nation states. And nation state as one of the mobilizers, now there are 100 other mobilizers. As a subject, will it be able to hold it, or it becomes like sports? We use the word, but maybe Manray is doing fencing, or and somebody else is doing something, but we keep on saying it's sports. But actually, it's very wide diversity of practices are getting wrapped into, and with a sign that is not actually telling us something.
When your iPhone's doing it, then you've got problems if you're a true believer in the term as being somehow intellectually distinct and honourable métier. It's a great question. Can the curatorial as a discourse in fact encompass the things that I was pretending that it encompassed today? I don't know that. I mean, I think you could pose that question and then try to answer it empirically, and I'm pretty sure you would find that the answer is no. It certainly doesn't equally encompass all of those things. And I'm certainly not I shouldn't be taken to be suggesting that what you've called the kind of engineering end of the spectrum, where I think the instrumentality of modern and contemporary art was in many respects at its most demonstrable, at its most fruitful, frankly. If you think about the great dictators and presidents, the sovereigns that I started listing at the end there, I mean, their stature and their aesthetic contribution, not just to nation, but also to peoples, far outweighs anything that any artist or curator has contributed. But I think you would find that we've stretched the term, as you, I think, rightly imply, beyond its utility. But that's not really the point of the research I'm doing. I think my goal here is more about making sure that when we characterize the profession of the curator, we don't exclude things that happen within it, even in a much narrower band, that we would associate with these other kinds of collective enunciation or enactment, right? And I think one of the pieces of evidence for me that is happening is precisely the way that the profession of curator has been so readily, so rapidly, I would say so prematurely professionalized. Be that in the form of educational programs sometimes, in some geographies. In our geography in Southeast Asia, not at all through education, but through the sort of headlong expansion of exhibiting institutions mainly, and the increasingly grandiose research pretensions of those institutions. I think what happens is that a certain type of curatorial action, which is very narrow, is sort of held out as the if you like, the job description. And I think it's my urge with this work really to just try to explode that, to try to get us to think a lot more objectively about who we're serving.
May I follow up with David's response to the question by asking questions to both Zoe and Manray again. In fact, in both your presentation, curatorial is a way of knowing. In a more theoretical and methodological sense. I would like to invite both of you to elaborate upon more on your individual methodology to, precisely the exhibition making processes. For Zoe, what the notion of giving back by bringing those artistic projects back to their motherland, where those stories originated in the first place. And I think for Manray, what is the notion of living and departing from the urban context, lack of better words, in order to readdress the problem of modernity you introduced in your theoretical summaries of this, the fugitive roots for Zomia. Can you address a little bit more, particularly from the exhibition making processes in the deep and south of Taiwan?
Is it working? Okay. Thank you for your question. I realized that I actually left off a very important part of my presentation, which was to share what curatorial strategies I had to give the absence of the documents and then the storytelling of the oral quality to a lot of the work that was commissioned. How did I give that back in the exhibition? First of all, the catalogue itself has a lot of poetic material, newly commissioned poetic material, where the actual documents of research were shared. And they were invited to respond, and I specifically said I want fictional responses, where they took the facts of what was presented to them, but twisted them into new kinds of ways of looking back. So the catalogue has a significant body of new poetic material. There were also 3 somewhat academic texts commissioned by academics and anthropologists, but again, I specifically said that I wanted poetic responses, and it was a bit of a fight, actually, to work with these minds who, for me, Walter Mignolo, Françoise Vergès, and Sumit K. Mandal, all of them committing to ideas of the South, but coming from a very specific point of academia. Each one of them has a very specific voice in terms of choice of word, but then also their geographic approach as to where their knowledge begins. For example, Françoise is a feminist. She grew up in northern Africa, around the Mauritian Islands, and her geography of the South begins with a study of water. So I asked her to write a history of the South as if we are on a body of water instead of a body of land. Then concurrent to that, I also wanted to think about how the presence of documents themselves can somewhat be visually overpowering, to the point that we actually become desensitized because we live in such an overly visual environment. So I said to the artists that I'd like to write with them in interpreting the work. Again, this was a big task for the artists to take on, in knowing that they're actually also still at times finishing the work. It's not complete. So that was also an interesting kind of dilemma to digest a work that is still in motion. But it was really fruitful for them in giving back to scripts at a certain point when they were producing film, or where text becomes a certain body of an archive, such as the Madfort Osman. And then finally, the March Meet. If those of you who know the Saja Biennial has an educational program called the March Meet, which takes place just after the opening, each curator had a day to themselves. For my March Meet, I asked the artists who were dealing with internalized forms of trauma to focus on one specific event in the process of making the work, that they had an empathic and conscionable dilemma in knowing how to present. Each of them were, again, resisting. They just wanted to get up, they wanted to talk about what the final work was, but I insisted that they must only focus on that particular emotional moment, which meant that the day was a choreographic, full theatrical performance, in a way, of song, of dance, of textual readings, of musical instrumental responses. And it gave back a sense of this history, but not through text. It was really important to me that it was not done through an ordinary reading, but it was an embodiment of that history. So I hope that somewhat shares a little bit what I should have said when I was talking earlier.
Thank you for the question. It's very good. The fugitive part, the escaping part, and the flight and everything actually is the main subject of my next exhibition. But now come back to the current exhibition. Actually, it's more. I can say that most artists are born, from the after the 50s and the the 60s. Yeah, so they went through. They grew up in the process of indigenous people's movements. If we start from the late 70s, 80s, 90s, and up to now, actually there are at least 4 waves of the movements. Each one has having different demand to it. So in a way, in that process, artists and the whole movement is reflecting to the history. For example, the 70s and the 80s movement is very much focused on how to correct the KMT policies. And then into the 80s, movements start to reflect on the historical, longer history to it as well. And then also to bring in the plain indigenous peoples movement into perspective. Yeah, and then the 90s are more into cultural revival and how to construct education system and so on. So all these artists that grew up through in these different generations, and they actually, their lives are related to that. And many of them actually grew up in the context of the cities, yeah, not directly inside the deep mountain, because the so-called deep mountain, it was already a long time ago, yeah. So very much has to do with how artists coming back to their identity. It's very difficult. Once you live in the city and you basically lost the language already, you want to come back to your homeland and re-identify with your culture. And then, there's a process of relearning and re-educating yourself, and also to see how to unbrainwash yourself from the KMT, from the new Han people-centric national identity. Yeah, and all these are a process for them to go through. So it's in that sense, this exhibition, artists from going through this thing is not much to do with when we are talking about indigenous people, especially the minorities of the Zomia, where James Scott is tracing the longer history. So it's a different story. Now, coming back to my next exhibition, it's about apartheid Taiwan. Actually, this long, stretched ditch, cutting from the north to the south. between the high mountain and then the plain area, directly on that line. At the moment, you can still see some local way, provincial roads going through, and then some residues of these ditches. Yeah, so the apartheid was there. The point is that the apartheid is placed on the area where the so-called the cooked indigenous people, and between dividing the Han people and then the uncooked indigenous people who are in the mountain. Yeah, so the issue actually to do with the cooked indigenous people now having to come back and reclaim their culture. And it is very difficult because for years and years, they have to hide their identity. They are fugitive. And just myself as an example, my grandmother is from the cooked indigenous people, and my father's side is Han people side. And then so for a long time, actually, my family never recognized or never spoke out loud that we are actually indigenous. Yeah. And then so of course, that part of the Makatao tribe, our language, our culture has disappeared already. And at the moment, we are reviving it. But the problem is that why it took so long for your parents, your grandparents to not even tell you, and not even recognize it. Even when now I ask my mother would still be quiet on this. This is our democratic period. Why are we still, demanding this by kind of being quiet, hiding, and so on? So this is a very long, deep impact on the, Taiwanese society's psychology at the moment. And as I said earlier, this is not peculiar to Taiwan. Actually, it's almost everywhere. Yeah, it's also part of the modernity, but at the same time, it's also part of the human longer history to see, okay, when we are now recognizing our different roots, many complex roots, what can we do? And why are we hiding? Why can we not see that history? Yeah, so that's my answer, and that's my next exhibition. Thank you.
Question for Zoe. How do you avoid some drama during your curatorial process? Because your exhibition is always talking about the past histories or some dramatic impact for the people. So how do you avoid a kind of second drama happen again? And another question for Manray. From your abstract, you're talking about as an outsider, how you curate the indigenous show, and what is the differences between the insiders and the outsider?
It's interesting that Frances talks about guest and host. I am constantly aware that I am a guest where I often live and work. And that's the first premise of understanding my engagement on difficult issues. I also work in countries where it is not possible to be visible with most of the content that I am particularly preoccupied by personally. In that situation, continuing to answer this question of how to give back when you do projects overseas, in realizing the confidentiality often of the content back home, I would say about 70% of my work is offline and not visible. And that has been the case for the majority of my little life of being in Asia. A lot happens between me and artists and art lovers and supporters that are on an invitational only basis, where you sit down and you have discussions as friends who are already in a position of trust or intimacy with. So for example, with the Sharjah Biennial, we screened Mira Koizumi's work, which was an instrumentalization of violence from Japan to China. But then we also screened a work by Hun No, which is a Vietnamese artist looking at how the Japanese were infiltrating Vietnam. And we had a really interesting discussion amongst a group of artists unpacking what that meant. Similarly, we've done the same with the work of Van Pauwen, and we also had a group of Senegalese come to Saigon from the Raw Material Company, where we sat and actually unpacked also the tendency to want to know what was going on in another place, but the sensitivities of representing that. For example, Tuan going to Senegal, taking those stories, a Vietnamese representing a Senegalese perspective, but then coming home and having to justify the fact that he has not even spoken about his peoples in Vietnam. So to what extent does he have the right to speak for somebody else? So in answer to your question, how to avoid the dramas, it's a very nuanced and carefully strategized community chosen to speak to. And it's always an assessment of who I'm speaking to that measures that dramatic potential disaster.
Okay, thank you. The issue of host and guest. Curating, it's by itself is power. If you have money, you have the power to judge, to make discourse, to do classification of artist work, to say something about artist work, and so on. You have power already. But then if you are aware of this power has to be very carefully used. Then you will want to see what is going on. And you come to a place, no matter that's your hometown or some foreign place, you come there, you say, why? There are so many things. I always have to ask. I always have to listen. You continuously need to ask and listen. Actually, then you are a guest. Then actually you are an outsider already. And I think that's an important attitude for curating itself. When you are given so much money to do a big project, then you can decide this, do this, and do that. You don't need to actually negotiate too much. You need to only negotiate with the organizer who will give you the money. Other than that, curators don't need to negotiate with the artist, which is bad itself. Yeah? We want to have the serious curatorial critique. That is the first thing to critique. So being aware of that power, the usage of the power, being aware of you being in any case in the possible position of an outsider, you always need to listen, you always need to ask. And I think that's why I call it an outsider.
Can I just very quickly add to the dramas? In curating Bruce Food, we had all kinds of dramas, mainly to do with kitchen dramas, because we had conceived of the exhibition as a living laboratory, as well as a kitchen lab. But this was taking place in a gallery that is not a kitchen, and in fact it didn't have a kitchen. And so there was a lot of negotiations that we had to prosecute and enact with the chief curator of RMIT University Gallery. It was very delicate. This was the first time RMIT University Gallery actually hosted a show like this that involved work in progress, having people eat inside a gallery. There were some very practical issues to do with smoke alarms, because we did eventually cook inside a gallery using burners, but things like smoke alarms and insurance and so forth. And all of this had to be very delicately negotiated.
Okay, thanks for the intensive discussion, and we still have time for the last question. Okay, lady first.
我有2个问题，那我要用中文说，不好意思。第一个问题是要给佩仪老师，那首先是先谢谢你为我们做的这个呈现，就是其实它是一个，我觉得你的呈现是一个还蛮完整的架构，就在论述南方如何作为一种方法论的一个讨论台湾近代策展这件事情。那比如说像你爬梳在一个全球的情境里面的一个南方作为一个策展的意识，然后到台湾的这个脉络之下作为一个讨论。那像刚Manray也有提到说，除了就是比如说以南方以南的 case 来讲，其实还有其他几个在东边发生的不同的展览，然后当中有很多不同的一些细致的在地的一些实践的过程。那因为我刚刚看到你的报告的最后面结论的地方，你也有提到说，南方作为一个命题，它其实也有可能会产生某种，比如说什么相对立于北方的一个那种异国情调的概念等等。那 我其实想要提问说，如果我们把南方作为一种当代策展的台湾可能的一个新的一个方法的话，要怎么样去面对，或者是说可能会碰触到，会不会又进入一种所谓南北对立的状态，这种二元的一个模式？然后还有就是有没有可能在这种论述之中又再一次的去generalize 或者是 romanticize 南方这样的一个概念？那我想就是请佩仪老师可不可以为我们多解释一下这个部分？然后第二个问题其实是要给那个 Francis。就是刚才这个题目是 Guess who is coming to dinner， 然后我印象很深刻，有一个蛮前面的 slide 的地方，就有一群光头的白人男性，几乎是一整群，整个 table 上面全部都是白人，然后蛮多个是光头的这样，然后在那边吃饭。然后我不知道说这是不是一个很讽刺性的回应这个题目，就是 Guess who is coming to dinner。那特别是这一场论坛是在讨论所谓的 cross-cultural curating 这件事情。那我想说，其实蛮多人都已经论述到关于这个关系美学里面那种太过浪漫化的倾向，比如说像 Claire Bishop 其实就论述蛮多这个部分。然后特别是因为我自己本身是来自表演艺术的背景，那我们在做表演艺术的研究，我想这个很 participatory 这种的 curation 其实是很 performative， 所以我想要分享一下，就是说我们在做，比如说在做表演艺术研究的时候，很难去 decontextualize 一个行为，就是去脉络这件事情，其实是还蛮 problematic。
时间。
OK， 所以我的问题是说，你怎么样去谈说，当你在谈这么多的一个 survey 的 case study 的时候，但是就把它放在这样一个 section 里面，你怎么去看待？就是特别是我们在谈论这种跨文化的概念的时候，我们要怎么样如何的能够，就是关于你对于去脉络化的讨论这件事情的看法？
我可能用中文回应这个问题。就是最近应该有很多就是东部的这一些。跟原住民或是跟土地有关的这些展览，我觉得每一个可能都需要更深入的去研究。那因为主要是因为这个研究，我是从6月真的是去门瑞的展览之后，才开始发展出这个系列的，所以可能需要更长的时间去更细致的去梳理一些东西。那在这边补充一下，南方以南这个展览，其实它不像是一般的一个展演，只是展完就算了。它虽然有非常非常多的50场的展演，但是它有更多的活动是把这个展演当成是一个起点，然后去制作更多的东西。例如他们有这个部落的青年工作坊，然后或是生态旅行的各式各样的配备，所以他们把展演当成了一个制造未来的系统，或是制造未来的 model， 可以让那个地方可以长久的去发展。所以也许看一个展览不能只看那3个月，那可能在1年2年之后，或是5年之后再回去，可能再可以更精确的去描述这一个展览。那另外一个你提到说要怎么样去避免南北的这个对立，那我想我在谈的那个把南方作为一种自在自为，就是你只去思考你自己，去面对自己的困境，把自己作为一个主体来思考，而不是眼睛都看在别人身上，别人好或者不好，别人可能有一些批评，或者是别人的这些赞美，你好像就觉得很棒，或是觉得不舒服。那我想怎么样可以让自己是一个主体，就是那个自在自为。然后这自在自为也包括了你怎么样去有不同的时间观去理解一些事情。所以我最后有提出了这个土时间，就是这种非效率时间。在做展览的时候，我们非常的讲求效率，但是其实有很多的这些更需要深刻的研究，或是花时间，真正的在那个地方理解之后，你的那个主体性才会更明确的长出来。那我想这个自在自为可能是去避免各式各样的什么再对立啊，或是变成别人的再殖民的对象的最好的方法。
I've been told I've just got 60 seconds, so very quickly. The exhibition that I co-curated, Bruce Food, was very much geared towards engaging with local audiences. And so the two artists from Asia that we brought in, Indonesian artists, Aramiani and Eliana Vista, were tasked with producing work or projects that sought to engage with local concerns. They were presented not as fully finished works, but as work in progress. And part of that work in progress involved, someone like Elia working with members of the public who walked into the gallery as she was conducting her research, but also she engaging with local RMIT University students. More generally, in terms of the range of exhibitions that I mentioned, I think the emergence and increasing popularity of socially engaged relational practices has seen the rise of food-based works, and at times that does run the risk of decontextualization. I guess a classic example might be Rierquit's food performances. It's often noted that pad thai that is cooked in New York, would be very much, it would taste very differently and experience very differently to, say, pad thai that is cooked and prepared in the streets of Bangkok or elsewhere. And so how do you translate across these gaps in the process of alimentation? That is, I think, a crucial question that needs to be grappled with. Thank you.
Okay, we already reached the limits of the time, so thanks all the speakers and the participations from the audience. And here I need to announce for tomorrow is our last day of the forums, and the title of tomorrow will be Curatorial Practice and Construction of Art History, and it will be begins at 1 p.m. 所以明天会是我们论坛最后一天。那这个题目叫做策展与艺术史的建构，那一样是1点，下午会开始。那欢迎大家再回来继续参与。